Welcome to Historian Diary. Today I will tell you a story about Byzantium. But this is not a story about empire or glory or Christianity. This is a story about sex, about a woman who performed pornographic shows in the Hippodrome of Constantinople, about geese eating grain off her naked body in front of thousands, about a pornographic actress who became Empress of the Byzantine Empire. This is the story of Theodora, and what she did before she wore a crown. My hand is trembling as I read this ancient source, written by Procopius, a historian who served in Justinian's court, who watched Theodora rule as empress, and who wrote a secret book, hidden during his lifetime, describing in explicit detail what Theodora did before she married the emperor. The Secret History. And what it describes is so graphic, so pornographic, that for 1500 years scholars debated whether it could possibly be true. This is the story of the geese performance. The story of public sex shows in Constantinople. The story of how a prostitute and pornographic performer became the most powerful woman in the Byzantine Empire. And it's all documented by someone who was there. Comment below where you're watching from, because what I'm about to tell you is ancient pornography, described by a Byzantine historian, about an empress. Let me start at the beginning. Theodora was born around 500 CE in Constantinople. Her father was a bearkeeper at the Hippodrome, the massive arena where chariot races and public entertainments happened. Her family was poor, lower class, and when her father died, Theodora and her sisters needed to survive. So they became performers, actresses. In the Byzantine Empire, that meant one thing: prostitution. Actresses and prostitutes were the same profession. There was no distinction. Theodora started young. Procopius writes that she began her career as a child, following her older sister Comito onto the stage. At first, she was too young for sexual performances, so she worked as an assistant. But as she grew older, as she developed, she joined the performances herself. And according to Procopius, she excelled. She became one of Constantinople's most famous pornographic performers. Please like this video, because what comes next is explicitly described by a historical source. Procopius, in The Secret History, writes about Theodora's performances in shocking detail. He describes her theatrical shows in the Hippodrome, shows that were openly pornographic, shows that thousands of people attended, and he names specific performances. Let me read what he wrote. This is a direct translation from ancient Greek. She would throw off her clothes and exhibit herself naked to all present, concealing only her private parts, not from any sense of shame, but because no one was permitted to appear there entirely naked, a girdle about the groin being always insisted on. Thus dressed, or rather undressed, she would sink down to the floor and lie on her back. Servants on whom this task had been imposed would then scatter grains of barley over her private parts, and geese, and specially trained for this purpose, would pick them off one by one with their beaks and swallow them. Read that again: geese, trained geese, eating grain off her genitals, in front of an audience, in the Hippodrome of Constantinople. This is what Procopius describes, a historian who served in the imperial court, who watched Theodora rule as empress, and who wrote this in secret, because he couldn't publish it during her lifetime. This performance was called Reenacting Leda and the Swan, a mythological story where Zeus, disguised as a swan, has sex with a woman. Theodora's performance was a pornographic parody, using geese instead of swans, and Procopius claims this was her most famous act, the one that made her notorious across Constantinople. Where are you watching from? Comment below, because this is documented in a historical source by a contemporary witness. But the geese performance wasn't her only act. Procopius describes other theatrical performances. He writes that Theodora would have sex with multiple partners on stage, that she specialized in group performances, that she would take on 10 young men in succession during theatrical shows, and that after those 10, she would service their servants 30 more men in the same performance. He writes, she would make love with a whole group of fellows, all of them drinking themselves silly through the night, taking them all one after the other. When they were all too exhausted to carry on, she would go to their servants, as many as 30 on occasion, and have intercourse with every one of them, Yet even so, she could not satisfy her lust. This is not modern historical interpretation. This is ancient text, written by someone who lived in 6th century Constantinople, who watched Theodora perform, and who wrote it down. Subscribe to Historian Diary if you haven't already, because we need to ask, is this true, or is this propaganda? Modern historians debate the reliability of Procopius's secret history. Some argue he exaggerated, that he hated Theodora, that he wrote this book as character assassination. Because Procopius also wrote official histories praising Justinian and Theodora, public histories where he calls her virtuous and wise, and then this secret book, hidden during his lifetime, where he calls her a whore and describes pornographic performances in explicit detail. So which Procopius is telling the truth? The public historian praising the Empress, or the secret historian describing geese eating grain off her naked body? Here's what we know. Theatrical performers in 6th century Byzantium were associated with prostitution. This is documented across multiple sources. Actresses regularly performed sexually explicit shows. The Hippodrome hosted not just chariot races, but theatrical performances that included nudity and sexual content. And women from lower-class families often entered this profession. So could Theodora have been a theatrical performer who did pornographic shows? Yes, that's entirely plausible given her background. Could she have performed a geese and grain show? Possibly. Such performances are consistent with what we know about Byzantine theater. But did she really service 40 men in one performance? That's where historians get skeptical. That sounds like exaggeration. Like Procopius taking a real career as a performer and amplifying it into grotesque caricature to destroy Theodora's reputation. But here's the thing. Even if Procopius exaggerated, even if he amplified, the core fact remains: Theodora was a theatrical performer, an actress, which in Byzantine society meant a prostitute, and she performed in the Hippodrome, in public, before she became empress. What are you thinking right now? Comment below. Is Procopius telling the truth or destroying her reputation? Let me tell you what happened next, because this is where the story becomes fascinating. Somehow this woman, whether pornographic performer or simply actress prostitute, met Justinian, the heir to the Byzantine throne, and he fell in love with her. Justinian was born in 482 CE, nephew of Emperor Justin, educated, intelligent, destined to rule the Byzantine Empire. And in his 30s, he became obsessed with Theodora, a woman from the absolute lowest class of Byzantine society, an actress, a prostitute, someone so far beneath his social status that marrying her was impossible because Byzantine law forbade it. Senators could not marry actresses. The social divide was too great, the moral stigma too strong. Actresses were considered infamous, disgraced, unfit for respectable society. Justinian wanted to marry Theodora, but the law said no, so Justinian changed the law. In 525 CE, he convinced his uncle Emperor Justin to pass a new law. Actresses who had renounced their former life could marry anyone, even senators. The law was written specifically for Theodora, so Justinian could marry her, an entire legal reform. For one woman, they married in 525 CE, and when Justin died in 527 CE, Justinian became emperor of the Byzantine Empire, and Theodora became empress, a former pornographic performer, wearing the imperial crown, ruling the Byzantine Empire. Please like this video and share it, because this story is about transformation. As empress, Theodora wasn't decorative, she was powerful. She participated in government, she influenced policy, and she used her position to help women in the situations she had escaped. She passed laws protecting prostitutes. She banned forced prostitution. She created refuges for women trying to leave sex work. She reformed Byzantine law to give women more rights in marriage and divorce. Procopius, in his official histories, praises these reforms. He describes Theodora as intelligent, politically savvy, essential to Justinian's reign. During the Nika Riots in 532 CE, when mobs nearly overthrew Justinian, It was Theodora who convinced him to stay and fight. She gave a speech. For my part, I hold with the old saying that the purple is the noblest shroud, meaning better to die as emperor than flee and live in shame. Her resolve saved Justinian's reign. So we have two Theodoras in the historical sources. The public Theodora, powerful empress, wise counselor, legal reformer, savior of the empire. And the secret Theodora, pornographic performer, prostitute, woman who had sex with 40 men in one show, woman with geese eating grain off her genitals. Can both be true? Can someone go from pornographic performer to powerful empress? Yes, obviously yes, because she did. The question is only how much of Procopius's secret history is accurate versus amplified. If you've watched this far, thank you. Comment below. Do you believe the geese performance happened? Or is it character assassination? I'm a historian, and my job is to present what the sources say and analyze their reliability. Here's my assessment. Theodora was definitely a theatrical performer. This is acknowledged even in the official histories. She came from a family of Hippodrome entertainers. She worked as an actress in her youth. And in 6th century Constantinople, actress meant prostitute. That's not controversial. That's established fact. Did she perform sexually explicit shows? Probably. That was standard for Byzantine theatrical performances. Actresses performed nude or semi-nude. Shows often had sexual content. The Hippodrome hosted these performances, so yes, likely Theodora performed in sexually explicit shows. The geese performance? This is where it gets speculative. Procopius describes it in vivid detail. Too much detail to be completely fabricated. He's describing something specific. A leader and the swan parody, with geese and grain. That level of specificity suggests he's describing something real, or at least something rumored to be real, that he's amplifying. Could trained geese eat grain off someone's body? Yes, that's not physically impossible. It would be a spectacle, a shocking, pornographic spectacle, but doable, and consistent with the transgressive, sexually explicit entertainment common in Byzantine hippodromes. The 40 men in one performance? That's where I'm skeptical. That sounds like exaggeration. Like Procopius taking she performed in group scenes and amplifying it to ridiculous extremes. 40 men is likely rhetorical exaggeration, meant to paint her as impossibly lustful, as someone whose sexual appetite could never be satisfied. But here's what matters. Even if Procopius exaggerated details, even if the geese performance is amplified, or the 40 men is fiction, the core truth remains. Theodora worked in the sex industry. She performed publicly. She came from the absolute bottom of Byzantine society. And she became Empress of the Byzantine Empire. That's the remarkable story. Not the specific acts, though those are certainly memorable, but the transformation. From actress prostitute to empress. From performing in the Hippodrome to ruling the Byzantine Empire. From social outcast to legal reformer. Subscribe to Historian Diary for more investigations into history's most scandalous figures. Write in the comments, what other controversial historical women should I research? Theodora died in 548 CE, age approximately 48. She had been empress for 21 years. Justinian was devastated. He ruled another 17 years but never remarried, never replaced her. He built monuments to her, included her in mosaics at Hagia Sophia and Ravenna. She is depicted wearing the imperial crown, holding symbols of power, equal to Justinian in the artwork. In the official histories, she is praised, intelligent, politically brilliant, a co-ruler who saved the empire. In the secret history, she is condemned, pornographic performer, insatiable whore, woman with geese eating off her naked body. Both can be true. Both probably are true in some form. She performed in the Hippodrome. She worked in the sex industry, and she became one of the most powerful women in Byzantine history. She used her power to protect women in the situations she had escaped, and she ruled alongside Justinian as a genuine co-emperor. The geese performance, whether exactly as described or amplified, is memorable, shocking, pornographic, but it's not the most important part of Theodora's story. The most important part is what she did after. How she transformed from stigmatized actress to powerful empress. How she used her power to reform laws. How she saved Justinian's throne. How she became essential to the Byzantine Empire. Procopius couldn't reconcile these two Theodoras, so he wrote two books, one public praising her, one secret condemning her. But maybe the truth is that both Theodoras are the same person. Someone who performed sexually in the Hippodrome because that was her survival. And someone who became empress and used that power to help others survive. Someone whose past didn't define her future. Someone who transformed. Thank you for watching Historian Diary. This is history. Sexual history. Controversial history. The kind where we can't be certain of every detail. Where ancient sources might exaggerate. Where character assassination and truth might mix. But where the core story, pornographic performer becomes Byzantine empress, is absolutely true. Theodora, performer, prostitute, actress, empress, legal reformer, co-ruler, savior of the empire. A woman who maybe had geese eat grain off her naked body in the Hippodrome, and who definitely wore the imperial crown and ruled the Byzantine Empire. The sources tried to shame her for her past, but her past is what makes her story remarkable. She survived. She transformed. She succeeded. She ruled. And 1500 years later, we're still talking about her. That's not shame. That's legacy. See you next time.